Hey, it's Gil Moore. Let's rock.
Well, welcome to Let's Rock.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining me. This is great. How's everything going in Metalworks?
Well, COVID-19 has been pretty hard on us because everything we do involves people getting together. So our studios, because of social distancing requirements, you can't, put a band in a space that you would normally do that. So it hasn't affected so much like mix sessions, but recording sessions, it's, made them very, very hard to deal with. Plus we have multiple studios. So you have the issue where you have like a common kitchen and that sort of thing. So the hallways and stuff become a problem. So it's been not good from that point of view. Our school, all schools have been hit with COVID problems. We've done a really good job because of our ability to teach online. So, the instructors and the academics team have done a great job there of, keeping the ball rolling. But it's been hard on students. A lot of them have different issues at home, and as you can imagine. And then the biggest part of Metalworks is our live team and our sound and lighting. And of course, it's been completely shut down. Like all sound and lighting companies, just there were no concerts, no festivals, no corporate events, no charity galas, no nothing. So that's all starting to come back now. So they're starting to get busy again as the restrictions are being lifted. So that's kind of the status quo right now at Metalworks. It feels like we're coming out of the ice age. As the COVID numbers have declined, we're gradually thawing out.
Right. Yeah, it's been a rough couple of years, that's for sure. So we watched the documentary last week, Rock and Roll Machine. Fantastic film, by the way. Congratulations on
Thank you.
on that. Why now? 30 years after you recorded, almost 30 years, I guess, after you recorded your last album, you decided to make a documentary?
That's a good question. It was just an idea that occurred to me about 5 or 6 years ago, and I have a buddy at NBC Universal, and I'd spoken to our original video director. This is before I met Sam Dunn. I was speaking to Don Allen, and he's working on a Miles Davis documentary. And I said, "Oh, heck, we should do a Triumph documentary." He might have said that to me. I can't remember how the seed of the idea started. And so I called Ron Suter up at NBC and said, "What do you think? Would Universal be interested in financing a documentary on Triumph?" And he said, "Hell yeah." So he got the ball rolling, and then Don Allen went out and he got other funders involved, and it was like a snowball that just rolled down a hill as they got all the money together to do it. And then they got whacked by COVID and everything. The brakes went on everything. But at the end of the day, the Don Allen at Revolver Films, he partway through sort of did a partnership or a handoff to Banger Films. Where he stayed involved, but Banger basically took control of the film. And so the directors that are credited on the movie that you saw, which is Sam Dunn and Mark Riccardelli, I think they did a really brilliant job taking what is really a bunch of stories and a bunch of characters and trying to bring them together and create a narrative. And what I find really boring about so many documentaries is that you don't get any real subtext. You're mainly just, it's like an interview that you've heard a million times, and it's kind of like, well, tell me something I don't already know. Whereas in this film, it's so wacky. It seems to bounce it's like a ping pong ball. It's bouncing all over the room and you're trying to follow it. And yet the story is intact. It's just that the storytelling is so interesting because of the characters involved.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that was my next question. You know, Sam Dunn did Beyond the Lighted Stage, the Rush documentary as well. And I think the thing that sets yours apart from that one is that nobody knew you because you were before social media. I mean, I was a huge Triumph fan when I was a little kid, and I never heard you guys speak until this documentary. You know, so it's really neat to see the stories, because the only stories we got were, yeah, we're coming to Ottawa tonight and we're going to kick your ass and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I think though, if they had just relied on interviews with the band, I think it would have been a really boring documentary.
I agree.
I think you have to get all these other lenses into what was going on to make it interesting. And furthermore, the one thing that I had hoped they would do is introduce humor, because in our initial interviews with them, and they said, no, even nothing going on camera, just interviews. Said, well, what was the mojo of the band? I said, well, humor kind of kept us together, like we were mates, because we joked around a lot, because if you didn't, you lose your mind touring. Touring's very stressful, for a lot of reasons. And if you can't, sort of stay lighthearted, it's easy to sort of succumb to the stress of being in a touring environment. So I'm kind of happy that they were able to do a few things that were tongue in cheek, and some of the folks that were interviewed were pretty funny with some of the things they said. I thought that that, for me anyway, when I watch it, I get a big charge out of some of those things, those chuckles.
Yeah, Sebastian Bach was hilarious.
Yeah, I think he kind of knocked it out of the park, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he was a bit of a fan.
Yeah, well, he was he's been in and out of our sort of lives and career, all the way along. I love him. And he's been on stage with us more than once. And in another iteration of Triumph, he might have been the lead singer. You never know. It's just he saw us in his hometown in Peterborough. That's how he got onto the band. We played the arena in Peterborough, and he was in the audience. And I guess he liked what he saw. And one thing led to another. He's recorded at Metalworks. He's been around the group, and he's a great guy, and he's also got a great sense of humor.
He's a funny guy.
He's a very funny guy, very talented. I mean, he's a great vocalist. He's a great writer, great front man. And yeah, he really did some serious damage there in the film. I cracked right up when I saw him. I went, Sebastian, I love you, man.
I also saw a YouTube clip of him singing Rock and Roll Machine with you guys. You're crazy if you want to steal the show. Yes, get ready, take a hit of rock and roll. Rock and Roll Machine plays faster. Everybody jump and shout. 5 miles fever, heavy metal fever, feel the sound of the
Yeah, that was when there used to be a Toronto Music Awards, and they had a Hall of Fame, and they inducted Triumph into their Hall of Fame. I think that it ceased to exist, as far as I know. Like, I think that Hall of Fame fell apart at some point. But that was the induction ceremony. We were supposed to play, and we brought them up and did that. Because, as I said, we played with him before, so it was kind of a natural. There was no rehearsal or anything like that, and he kind of ripped it up.
He seems like the kind of guy that is such a fan that he wouldn't need any preparation at all to do stuff like that.
No, that was the cool thing. It kind of reminded me of when I was getting started and I had bands that played in nightclubs and stuff. There was always always had a friend that was a vocalist or a guitarist or whatever that could kind of just walk up on stage. I always loved that sort of free form jam thing that you could do sometimes in clubs. So that was, I guess, an extension of that. I always found that fun once you get somebody else up on stage and it just shakes everything up.
Absolutely. And it's funny. I was talking to Lawrence Gowan on Friday,
Yeah.
and we had a big chat about you and your studio. And he was telling me stories about back in the 70s where, he would be playing at the Gasworks and Rough Trade would be upstairs and Triumph would be a block away and Gatto would be across the street. And, he would run out full costume between sets and watch a bit of the Triumph show and then go see Gatto. It must have been an absolutely amazing time to be, coming of age in music in that area. What was it, Yonge Street, I'm guessing?
Yeah. I mean, we had a really big club scene in Toronto at that time. And of course, the funny thing was, in a way, we didn't realize how lucky we were as musicians that we had this vibrant club scene, because all you could think about and dream about is getting out of the clubs. You wanted to, quote unquote, make it, whatever that entailed. And of course, 99% of all bands, or 99.9, are all doomed to failure, really.
Exactly.
Like it's one in a million that actually is lucky enough to get a strong enough audience that they can actually get away from clubs. But those were fun times. They were really fun times.
And then another interesting thing is that he said, he saw you singing. I think he said you were singing. He saw you outside on a sweltering hot day in the middle of summer. You were singing a Doobie Brothers song. And he said, wow, that guy's great. And then a little while later, he saw you in Triumph and he said, hey, that's that Doobie Brothers guy. and then years later, he recorded at your studio.
Yeah, I didn't know that story, but it doesn't surprise me. Speaking of fun guys, I mean, he's an amazing, he's not just an amazing musician, amazing singer, but he's a great guy. He's a really wonderful person, and I love him. And yeah, he's Larry is on our tribute record, which is going to come out next year. And he also he fronted a band. The video, I believe, is on YouTube, or it's on the Triumph channel, at Canada's Walk of Fame in 2019 when they inducted us. So they created a Triumph band, which was essentially Larry and his brother and Tim from the Arkells. And anyway, it was a fabulous group, and they performed 3 Triumph songs, and Larry sang them all. And man, I'll tell you what, he knocked it out of the park. Like everybody in the whole venue, it was the highlight it capped off the evening, and it was the highlight. Like everybody stood up and they were all cheering, and it was something. And it was really Larry's talent that, not only performing but also coordinating all the musicians and stuff. He's a master.
It's the same old story all over again. Turn a lover into just another friend. But I ain't asking much. The truth will do just fine. Won't you lay it on the line?
Yeah, and he's hilarious too. His stories about you guys were just great. riding down to watch you guys outside on a sweltering hot day on his bicycle to check you guys out. I thought it was great. Going back to that time, I think I'm going to use this word a lot in this interview, and that is ballsy, because everything you guys seem to do, everything I learned from the documentary, you guys had balls on you. Like, I'm thinking about the Maple Leaf Gardens show, where you didn't even have an album or a record contract and you're playing Maple Leaf Gardens. That takes a serious set of balls. The ambition.
We've got to be crazy, but it was a little of both. We've been asked about some of these stories because they almost seem like they're fake or they're hard to believe, but they're actually true stories, and I think what happened is Mike and I fed off each other. And sometimes you need two conspirators to actually believe in something that's not quite believable. So, and then Rick would just go along with it. Well, whatever you guys think, you know. So when we had talked our way into getting a Massey Hall gig, which we, you know, kind of just maybe deserved this much. And it turned out that, you know, we were right. Like the tickets started selling really fast. And then what seemed like a bad stroke of luck, which was the fire marshal made a unilateral decision to kick us out of the venue for being, you know, having too much pyro and you know, and just general fear. Like, who are these Triumph guys? And this is an old venue, and I think they're just going to destroy it. So, which initially sound okay. Now you've got your hometown concert in a legitimate, you know, the second best or the second biggest venue in the city, and now you've been kicked out. And so we went to Michael Cole at CPI and said, Michael, well, clearly, you know, we can kind of take advantage of the fact that it's now we're controversial. And you got to remember, this is all before social media, as you mentioned. And one thing led to another. You know, the Toronto Star wrote a big story about us, and like, well, why are these guys getting the boot from Massey Hall, kind of thing. And one thing led to another. Michael said, well, I'm not doing this in the Gardens. You're crazy. You know, need 10,000 people in there to break even, and blah. And we just kept pushing and pushing, and you know, I don't know, it'll work out. Like, we'll do a lot of interviews. You know, we've got more fans than you think we have, and yada yada. And you know, we'd hang up, and he'd still say no. We just kept pushing and pushing, pushing till he finally caved. And then the strange thing is, it worked out. You know, like, I guess we created enough noise in the press that it worked out. And then when we actually played the show, we pulled it off. So all of a sudden, it was like we went from, you know, 0 to 100 in a very, very short period of time. We bypassed a lot of steps. And then we used that philosophy when we went to America. And that's why we never opened for anybody. We went down with the idea that we would convince the promoters and convince the media that there was something, even though it was maybe, we're not really sure what it is, but these Triumph guys are some special sauce, blah, 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 you know, smoke and mirrors or whatever. Just kind of, when we finally met Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, through the late great Pat Kelleher, who was our artist rep at RCA Records in New York. And I realized, you know, that he got the whole thing about, you know, sort of mystique, and how did Elvis go from being a truck driver to being, you know, the biggest act in the world at one time. And a lot of it comes down to, you know, the perception and the truth versus the reality, et cetera, et cetera. So I think with music, there's always been a bit of that. You know, the Beatles and the Stones, were the Beatles really good guys and the Rolling Stones really the dark guys, or was that just perception? You know,
perception, for sure. Absolutely. Where did this pyro thing come from? Because I don't think, I mean, I was pretty young when you guys started, but I don't think anyone aside from Kiss was doing pyro at that time.
Yeah, I got an interest in it. You know, I saw Kiss in their very early incarnation. And they, you know, Kiss started a couple of years before Triumph, and I saw Kiss in an early incarnation. And but I was kind of interested in pyro and magic. So seeing a band use it on stage was pretty cool. But there was another band in Buffalo, I can't remember their name right now, who were into a lot of wacky stuff on stage. And like, I kind of got a charge out of the theater of bands, because it seemed like it was, you know, it was creating more of a cinematic, you know, sort of presentation for a band. But hadn't really seen what might be the right fit. I didn't know. I was a kid, and I'm just looking at all this stuff, and I'm thinking, somehow I thought magic would have should be mixed in there somehow, just illusions, I'll call them. And so anyway, I just developed an interest. Pyro was one of those interests, and I started mucking around with different types of things, map gas, gunpowder, all sorts of stuff, burned myself, blew the window out of my house. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff that you wouldn't do now. But sometimes when you're, a 20-year-old with a lot of testosterone, you do some things that you probably wouldn't do.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the torch. The torch story was the funniest part of the movie to me. And I think I don't want to give spoilers away because I don't know if this has been released yet everywhere, but I think it was the reaction of the other guys in the band, the reactions of Rick and Mike, who couldn't stop laughing at your story about this thing.
Yeah, it was a funny story, and I guess again it's funny because it's so true. And yeah, I don't want to give it away. I mean, just you watch the film, and truth is stranger than fiction in some ways, But I was a happy camper that day when I got that big baby. Oh, and I could, it was like, I don't know, it was like getting your first something, your first hot car, or your first whatever. That was a big sort of pyrotechnic adventure, that baby.
It was a great story for everybody listening and watching this. That's the highlight. What about, okay, this is kind of a strange question, but one more Pyro question. Well, they're fun. Pyro's awesome. And I saw Triumph on the Thunder 7 tour, and I remember this. I had a nasty cold and my eyes were watering, and it was the first time I ever saw Triumph. And you had that big explosion at one point that worked its way from the outside to the inside. And I don't think I went to school for about a week after that. It blew me away. My eyes just started dripping. I couldn't see for about a week. It was wonderful. Anyway, one more question. The musicianship versus the Pyro. A lot of people back in the day, and even now, would leave a Kiss concert thinking, yeah, that show was amazing. There was so much fire. But at a Triumph concert, you would walk away saying the musicianship was great. The songs were great. The Pyro was great, but it was more about the music. How did you find the balance?
Well, I think it's with your background, I mean, I love Kiss for what they are, but, I don't think that they embrace the ethic of trying to be a musician first. I mean, maybe that's a slag, and maybe I shouldn't say that. Like I said, I mean, I get a big charge out of Kiss, but I guess what I mean is just the neighborhood that we grew up in here in Toronto. Toronto had an inordinate number of very, very talented musicians, and I don't know why it's in the DNA or something, or the water, but some tremendous musicians came from Toronto. So as little kids, when we got interested in music, we got our first guitars and our first sets of drums and so on. And we started to play, and we started to follow bands, which is how all musicians really get started. The whole thing was about how well you could play. So long before ever, dreaming about being on a concert stage or anything like that, it was just all about what you could play. So that's how we grew up. So when we were into our early 20s and we're putting Triumph together, that sort of aesthetic has not gone away. We didn't suddenly go, oh, well, you know what, we'll put on a big show with a lot of lights and stuff and laser beams, and we don't have to be good musicians anymore. We don't have to write quality songs anymore because our show's going to carry the day. And that was not it at all. Our idea was that we wanted to create theater to surround the music. So we really didn't do anything, whether it was, even though I would say certain effects seem somewhat gratuitous, but we really didn't do them gratuitously, because there was always an impact point of some sort or another, whether it was a subtle thing and we were trying to be in complete darkness with only sound effects, or in complete darkness with only a single laser or something like that, versus a myriad of lights all at once, and the feeling in the audience that the whole building was lighting up. And so we wanted those great changes and surprises. We had we had an expression that we used called net gasp effect, which was a joke. And but the serious part was we'd work with our lighting designer, Paul Dexter, for the most part, and it was always, okay, yeah, here's this piece of music, but if we do this, this, and this at these intervals, it's going to produce that shock and awe, or it just accentuates the emotion. Makes you, if you're sad, makes you sadder. If you're happy, makes you happier. Whatever the case may be. And so that was always the idea, is to take that palette and make it so that it was, a little bit of a play or a circus or an exposition of some sort, to pull the audience right into the performance, to really create a magnet with the audience. That was the whole thing. But we never let musicianship take a back seat to that.
Yeah, it was the perfect blend. That's what I always thought. The perfect blend of musicianship and showmanship. It was, I loved my Triumph shows. But you talked about the songwriting. Can you take us through a Triumph songwriting session? I noticed on your albums that all three of you get credit for songwriting, which is, I think, pretty strange at that time, wasn't it? It was usually individuals. I know Van Halen did it. Everybody in the band got credit, but was this kind of an all for one for all type deal with songwriting?
Yeah, I would say it was, because there were various contributions at various times. And we also knew that we all had sort of a role to play. So, for example, Mike Levine was, from day one, and still is to this day, really functioned as not just a musician, but also a producer. In today's world, of Drake and Justin Bieber, a producer's a writer of sorts. So, maybe we were forecasting that value onto a producer. We looked at a lot of the production techniques, or the producer guidance commentary, call it what you will, to be creatively as important sometimes as what chord you're playing or what lyric you're singing. So, it's almost like saying in looking at it through the lens of rhythm, there's no provision for rhythm being part of writing. And yet we knew that in a rock band, especially a three-piece one, how incredibly important the rhythm is. So I think at a certain point, it was after Just a Game, when we kind of talked about, how do you really assign who contributed what, to a song? And it was difficult, so we just decided, what, whether, one person is more instrumental in a certain song or not, that we just would take credit in individual credit would go the way of the dodo bird, and we would just take credit as a band. I think it was a good decision, just for band unity, and not having to constantly discuss. There's somebody outside here making a lot of noise. Sorry about that.
All good.
Yeah, not having to really be concerned with credit. There was so much effort that goes into a three-piece band, and everybody's doing so much. It's hard to keep track of the little bits and pieces. So that's how we operated.
It's very interesting, though. Why doesn't the rhythm section get writing credit usually?
Sorry, what was that?
I've always wondered this about bands. Why doesn't the drummer get more songwriting credits? I'm pretty sure the singer is not telling him what to play, so he should be.
Yeah, I mean, they have this they have these royalties now called neighboring rights that relate to the musicians, that when we were starting, we didn't, first of all, I didn't pay all that much attention to it, but I think if I was a music publisher, which I'm not, I would probably be able to say that the lyrics and the melody and the chord structure constitute, the assets, let's say, within a copyright. And I guess it's historical. Depends on, the changing times in music and how it was created with let's just say rock and roll generally would lead you to think that perhaps that needed to be adjusted somewhat, and perhaps it will be in the future. Like I said, the modern artists now that are in the hip hop world, for example, they treat writing credits very much differently than rock bands in the 80s did.
Yeah, I always wondered that about Rush as well. Why did Neil Peart just get the lyrics by Neil Peart, but obviously he was a big part of the songwriting process, the music of it.
Yeah, it gets back to that definition, Ken. It's like, okay, I would agree with you. Like if you were to take, Rush is a great group, obviously. If you take Neil, and rest in peace, great guy, unbelievable drummer. And if you were to take him out of Rush and insert someone else, or listen, to, the band with John Rutsey playing drums or whatever, you realize, yeah, the songs really change when you change him, you're changing a lot. And I think the same thing would happen if you were to switch out Alex or you were to switch out Geddy, you'd find the same thing, because those guys were all such a piece of the signature of that band. And most bands are like that. Like, with the Stones, having Charlie pass away 3 weeks ago, and you go, well, there's a lot of guys that can play Charlie Watts's parts. No, not so much. Like, just try. I don't care who it is. There's a certain signature to Charlie's playing that's unmistakable. And people would tend to think it would be easy to replicate simply because he has a sparse, his concepts of percussion were sparse, but it's not easy. It's not easy to change out that whatever that secret sauce or that signature that he has is. It's pretty difficult to deal with.
Yeah. I'm learning how to play the drums now. I just started learning a little while ago, and I'm pretty shitty actually. But it makes me wonder, when you were playing drums, when you were first starting out, and you started singing, where is the focus, and how do you get to that level where you can do them both at the same time? And in the studio, you're singing. You're doing your drum tracks and then you're doing your vocal tracks later. Then live, you've got to put them all together. Were there any tunes that you said, oh my God, what have I done? How am I going to pull this off?
Yeah, many times. And it just kind of just bullheaded perseverance to actually get it to work. But I was able to, my approach, I guess I would say, was that I would have to get the drums to feel like there was an autopilot thing that was kicking in, that the hands and feet just knew where to go, and then you could kind of synchronize that to the cadence of the vocal. It's I don't know, it's hard for me to describe, but it's kind of a no man's land that I don't recommend.
There weren't very many people back then who were doing that. I think, Don Henley maybe, and Levon Helm.
Yeah, if you're going to sing and play drums, you're much better to play music like the Eagles than Triumph.
Yeah, a little easier, right?
I think I'd sooner play Desperado than Rock and Roll Machine anytime. If I'm going to sing and play drums simultaneously.
Oh, that's a beast. I don't know how you do that. I'm still trying to figure out how to get the bass drum on, 1 and 3. Yeah, is it? Kudos. 2 more questions. How many, this is just kind of a fun question. I noticed this in the documentary, but how many hockey jerseys does Mike Levine have?
How many what?
Hockey jerseys.
It was somewhat limitless because when we would go from, on a tour, say we would be going from arena to arena to arena, and in every one you had a major franchise of some sort, and our production manager would generally go to the hall manager and say, "Hey, give me a jersey of the blah, blah," and we'll get Mike on stage with that. And of course, the arena managers were all like, "Well, of course, if you're, playing in, Chicago at Rosemont Horizon, it's like, yeah, you're going to promote the Blackhawks, right? Because they're the tenant in the building or whatever." So I don't know, it's just one of those things that kicked in. Mike got into the habit of doing that and realized the fans liked it. And then the fans started to expect it. Then we'd be showing up and arena managers would be, "Hey, can you guys get Mike to wear the shirt?" It just became a vicious circle. So yeah, I would say the answer to your question is it was somewhat limitless.
He got to keep them all too?
I'm sorry?
He got to keep all of them?
Well, I was the pack rat in the band, so there was probably a greater chance that I was stuffing the jerseys into a box or getting our crew to do it. I always had extra cases on the road, and I like to collect souvenirs and stuff. I think Mike was not as concerned with it, but it's funny, the ones we have, we've been able to, Mike signed a bunch of them for different charities and so on. And so they've gone to good use. Let's put it that way. There's no Mike Levine, hockey jerseys that have gone to waste. As a matter of fact, our merch company just launched a Mike Levine Triumph hockey jersey for sale.
Oh, I gotta get one.
people can get it's got a big old Triumph. It's a genuine NHL caliber jersey, and it's got a big old Triumph logo on the front, and it says number one, Mike Levine number one or something on the back. It's really cool.
Awesome. I got to get one of those. Let's go back to the documentary here. Did the documentary make you more aware of Triumph's place in Canadian rock history? I know it's kind of an ego question, but did it make you realize how important you were to the history of Canadian rock?
I think it allowed us to sit in the director's chair and look through the director's lens, and it allowed us to sit in the fans' chairs and look through their respective lenses. So in that respect, it ends up changing our perception of what was going on, because we were, outward looking, not inward looking. And certainly feel an awful lot of gratitude to our fans and and to the promoters that promoted our shows, and the crews that crewed our shows, and everybody involved. And when you actually see it in a film, as I say, and now we're on the outside looking in, it's fascinating and humbling, at the same time. We certainly couldn't have accomplished the things that we were able to without first being lucky enough to sort of find each other, and then get some good breaks, like the crazy story we talked about with Massey Hall, which was, it was lucky, and we took advantage of a good break, which is what I'm always trying to do in golf.
Good point.
So somehow in music, the history ended up being what it is. It's in the history books, and looking at it through from the viewpoint of the audience and the director, and people in the business that helped us along the way, the Irving Azoffs and Michael Coles, and all these folks and fellow musicians like Larry and Sebastian and stuff. It was quite an experience, Ken. I never thought it would be as much of a thrill, really, as it turned out to be.
Actually, one of the things that really surprised me was John 5. Not because of anything crazy, but his music is so completely different from Triumph, to hear him talking about you guys the way he did just shows that you can reach out to everybody when you make music.
Yeah, it does. And you know, John Five is unbelievable. What a player.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I haven't met him. I'm hoping I'm going to get a chance to, you know, meet him virtually or in person somehow when we get out of COVID. But yeah, I was kind of shocked, you know, when you find out that there's somebody that you don't even know, and they, you know, all of a sudden they're, you know, evangelizing about your music and so on. It's humbling.
Very cool. So fantastic documentary, Rock and Roll Machine. Congratulations again. It was just such a great hour and a half. It was awesome to relive those memories, and I felt like I was 15 years old again with my runny eyes at your explosion concert. it was amazing. So thank you for putting this out. Thank you for getting the idea. Thanks for all the great music you've made. And I wanted to end this on a kind of cheesy note and just say, here's to health, here's to wealth, and may you never doubt yourself.
Love
that. So thank you again for this. This was just great, and it's awesome chatting with you. Thanks so much, and best of luck with Metalworks and the documentary and all that stuff.
Appreciate it, Ken. You have a great day.
Thanks. What's that picture up behind your left shoulder?
This one is that's the very first band I ever played in my life.
Wow, that's awesome.
So this guy here, his name was Fred, and we were schoolmates together. This guy's name was Jim Christensen, Fred Powell, and that's me on those Rogers drums. And that day we had Fred's mom was taking a photo of us in their basement.
How old were you there?
Oh, that would be grade 8 or 9, so 13, maybe 13 and a half. It's the only photo I have of that group.